Hi, I'm New York Times Metro reporter Jeff Mays sitting in for Sam Roberts. On this program, we feature leading newsmakers and the New York Times journalists who cover them. This week, I'll speak with New York Times investigative journalist Jay Root. He's been reporting on recent audits of the mayor's campaign funding and how money is being spent on the city's migrant crisis. But first, it's been roughly 2.5 months since Governor Kathy Hochul decided to suspend the city's congestion pricing plan, a plan that was revived in response to a transit crisis in 2017. New York Times mass transit journalist Ana Ley consulted with transit experts about the current state of the MTA, and it's beginning to look like New York City has another crisis on its hands. Welcome, Ana.
Hi, thanks so much.
So this crisis, potential crisis, it's linked to the Governor Hochul's recent decision to suspend congestion pricing. Is that right?
Yeah, so the system has been struggling for a really long time, because it's very old and it really needs a lot of upgrades to be able to withstand the wear and tear that comes with being as old as it is. And it also wasn't built to be able to contend with climate change. And so this money that was coming in from congestion pricing was going to help get to those repairs and to those retrofits. Now we don't know if that's going to happen.
And so, but congestion pricing, when it was originally passed in 2017 with Governor Cuomo, that was the goal, right? That money was supposed to be specifically used to make these sort of repairs and upgrades that would make the system more resilient.
Exactly. So the money was put in what is called a lockbox, which meant that the MTA couldn't touch it for anything that wasn't specifically for nuts and bolts work. So they couldn't use the money for mosaics or for like everyday operating expenses. They would have to use it for, repairing the system that keeps the thing running, signals, things that are not very glamorous, but that are really necessary to keep the subway running efficiently. And it was going to generate about $15 billion specifically intended for that.
Have there been any sort of immediate consequences to the sort of this funding being up in the air?
Yeah, I think that the Second Avenue subway project that was uh, the MTA had already started doing sort of the initial phase of that project. They had to stop because, it's not clear whether they're going to have the funding for it. And there was also federal money on the line that the MTA was counting on, but the federal government requires the MTA to match those funds. Well, not the MTA, but the local entities, would have had to kind of pitch in for the feds to match a certain amount. And now they don't know if they're going to get that.
I'm wondering in your work and out talking to writers, what are you hearing? Because, I know recently there was a major rainstorm and I called my wife and I was like, look, you better hurry up and get home because this could affect the system. What are you hearing from writers about how they feel about this decision and the issues with the subway?
I think, even before I wrote the story, people would ask me, when are we going to go back to 2017? Are we going to have another summer of hell? Is something going to fall on my head while I'm riding the subway? And, some of this is joking. But I think people are really afraid that the system is going to deteriorate to that level again, because it was really frustrating for people who were trying to get around in New York. And it's not really, I mean, we can't know for certain if and when that's going to happen. But when I was talking with experts, basically they said it's kind of a matter of time, whenever there's another Sandy or some other uh, series of accidents or engineering emergencies in the system that are just sort of the result of the system being old. And, think about carrying a book bag that, is really, really old and it just starts to fray. You don't know when your books are going to fall out of it. You just know that you're kind of playing with fate there.
New York City just doesn't work without the subway, right? Too many people live here. I'm wondering if there are any economic impacts for this decision to pause congestion pricing.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. The governor, when she announced this decision, she said, "We can't do it now. The economy's too fragile. People can't afford it." But my colleague Stephanos Chen spoke with a lot of people who are knowledgeable in the area, and basically people said that actually congestion pricing would have helped the economy. And a lot of people that go into Manhattan in a car to commute are pretty wealthy. I mean, and they're well off. They make a substantial amount of money. They make enough money that $15 a day toll to get into the zone is not going to do a huge amount of damage.
Has the MTA figured out any other revenue sources to sort of do the sort of repairs, the sort of dire repairs that you just talked about?
Since 2017, the system has been more reliable. On-time performance rates for trains they're much better. And that's because the MTA has sort of restructured the way that they spend things and prioritize what they call state of good repair, which is what these kinds of fixes are. But they can only do so much with the money that they have. And so, in talking with the MTA, they've said, we're doing a lot better than we were then, but we need more investment to maintain things the way that they are and to improve them because reliability could certainly be better.
There was some thought initially that Governor Hochul's decision to pause congestion pricing was related to upcoming elections. What was your sense on what may have been some of the other unspoken reasons on why she made that decision?
Yeah, there was definitely, we had coverage, Nick Fandos, one of our politics reporters wrote about some conversations that happened there. Forgive me, it might have actually been another reporter, but there have been sort of speculations around that. It was Grace Ashford. There has been, sort of speculation around the motivation behind her decision to do this. Um, I don't really get the sense that has been a huge driver for her. I mean, I'm not sure. I wasn't in the room. I'm not in her head, but it really does seem like she, responded to criticism of the program, and there has been a lot of it. There was a survey that was published in April that found that it was very unpopular. And as we pointed out in a story recently, that might be because it was hard for people to see the benefits of the program, and it was easier for them to see the toll, in which nobody wants to pay money for anything. And so I think that she really sort of honed in on that survey and just sort of these complaints that people have had about the program.
Has the governor come up with any alternative funding measures? I know the legislature is not in session at the moment. Are there any plans to replace the $15 billion that congestion pricing was going to deliver?
No, there is no plan in place, and the governor has been under a lot of pressure to come up with some way to come up with this huge amount of money. She has said that she will do it, that she'll find a way to plug the hole in the capital plan for the MTA. And the other week, she found $54 million to at least continue that first piece of the Second Avenue subway extension. But it's really not a lot of money. I mean, 15 billion compared to 54 million is it doesn't do that much.
And why do you think she came up with that money? Was there pressure to find that $54 million? Had work on the extension stopped, correct?
It did, yeah. It did stop, and anyone who's lived in New York for a long time probably knows that the Second Avenue subway project has been this huge disappointment for people because politicians have promised so many times that they're going to bring it up north, to this community that really needs it in East Harlem. And I think the optics were not great for her, to have this thing stopped because of this very last minute decision when so much planning has gone into it.
And there are serious challenges in East Harlem where the Second Avenue subway extension was being worked upon. There has to be some disappointment from people in that area who are looking forward to that extension. I'm wondering if in the long term, the removal of congestion pricing means that we won't see these sort of grander projects that are designed to not just bring the subway up to date, but sort of expand the footprint of the subway.
Yeah, I think this experience has really thrown into question whether the MTA, whether the city can do ambitious things. Because the program was so close to the finish line, and to just sort of have it yanked from under the feet of the MTA was, I think, really demoralizing for the authority. But more broadly, I think people have really started to question whether it, in a place that's so bogged down by politics and bureaucracy, that big things are possible.
And there's also other issues with congestion pricing. One of the reasons was to help deal with the environment. Have any of those sort of concerns been addressed with the sort of halt in congestion pricing?
That is, I think, something that transit advocates have been most frustrated by, because even if Governor Hochul finds the money to pay for these things, that does not take care of the problem that one of the problems that congestion pricing was supposed to solve, which was to reduce pollution, to reduce noise, and just clutter in Midtown Manhattan and Lower Manhattan. It was supposed to just make the place a more enjoyable area to be in.
Are we back at 2017 yet? Have we seen the sort of delays that we saw that led to that being called the summer of hell?
No, not at all. The system is not anywhere near that point. Reliability rates are better than they were then. There have been some incidents that I think have startled people. There were a couple of derailments in January. There was when it was really hot the other week, there were delays and people stuck in really hot stations. But we have not reached that point. I think the fear is that if these repairs are not made, it'll become more likely that we'll head in that direction.
Anna, thank you for your reporting on this issue. We'll look forward to your continued reporting.
Thank you, Jeff.
Coming up next, the mayor's money troubles. My next guest is a New York Times investigative reporter based in Albany. In recent weeks, the mayor has been saddled by audits focusing on campaign funding and how much money is being spent on the city's migrant crisis. Jay Root has been covering these stories and joins us now. Welcome, Jay.
Hey.
So tell us a little bit about what is happening with this investigation or look into the mayor's campaign finances. There were some interesting findings recently.
Well, every city candidate has to get audited. There's a requirement that they all get audited, and this has been going on for 3 years, basically. So we're just now getting the draft audit, which we obtained, our colleague Bianca Polaro obtained under the FOIL, the Freedom of Information Law. And it basically said that he spent $2.3 million that they can't verify was legitimate. And so there's this back and forth going on between the campaign. And the mayor says, hey, give us time. We'll get to this. Well, they've already blown the deadline. The deadline was July 1, and now they've been given a deadline until August 30th. But a lot of the findings that are in this audit sort of track what we already know from these state prosecutions and federal investigations into straw donors. And then there were a lot of just records that they just didn't have documentation for, payments, bank records, and things like that.
And so this is $2.3 million. Is that money that he's going to have to potentially return? New York City has a campaign finance matching system. Is he going to have to return any of that money?
I mean, he could. If he can't prove that it was legitimately spent, he will have to return some of it. The other thing is that he spent more than the spending cap. There's a spending cap, a citywide spending cap that affects candidates running for office in New York City, and he went beyond it according to the available records. And so they've got to prove that they didn't go beyond that. And the fines are pretty severe for that. We did an analysis on that and determined that he could be liable for up to $500,000, about $500,000 in fines.
And the mayor is also facing an ongoing federal investigation into his campaign fundraising. Talk a little bit more. Are the findings of this audit lining up with what federal authorities are looking at?
Yes, they are. One of the things that we have found in the audit is that some of the things that have been same things that have been explored and that have been talked about in these federal investigations, such as who is donating money. They highlighted in this audit some of the donations that came from entities or people affiliated with the Turkish government. And that's one of the things that we have reported at the New York Times, that federal investigators are looking at possible influx of foreign donations. It's worth pointing out here that the mayor has not been accused of any wrongdoing, and he vigorously denies any wrongdoing.
I'm wondering, in terms of this most recent audit, you mentioned that this is 3 years after the 2021 election. Why has it taken so long to complete this audit? And I'm wondering, the mayor is standing for re-election. Will that affect his ability to receive any funding for his upcoming re-election campaign?
Yes, it could. I think that the delays in the audits is one of the biggest complaints about the Campaign Finance Board. In many ways, the Campaign Finance Board is considered a model for public matching fund systems across the country. It was one of the first ones to do it. It was brought about in the wake of a scandal in the Koch administration in the late 80s. But one of the big complaints you do hear is these things really, really drag on. But if, they have the power to deny awarding certain, matching funds if the candidates don't comply with their laws. But that's pretty far down the road. What we're looking at now is for the Adams campaign to reply, to give their answers. Again, they already blew the deadline. The deadline was July 1. They didn't make it. They were given an extension to the end of August. And so we're waiting to see, they need to come up with these receipts. They need to prove that they didn't go over the spending cap, or if they did go over the spending cap, they're going to potentially face fines.
Did the Adams campaign respond to your queries about the audit?
They did. They basically said, look, give us time. We're going to respond. We're going to resolve this. We raised and spent $18 million, basically, a lot of that from matching funds. Just a tremendous amount of paperwork. So they need time to come up. In some cases, maybe the receipts are missing, or if they got a query from auditors, maybe they responded with the wrong paperwork and they need to reconcile that. And so it basically are saying, nothing to see here. We're going to fix this. Also, the mayor was extremely upset that this got leaked. That's the way he said it. It was leaked, but actually we got it pursuant to transparency laws.
I'm wondering, given the scope of this audit, have anyone proposed any sort of reforms that would take a look at these sort of issues in terms of bundlers and some of the donations that the mayor received? Are there any reforms to be put in place to affect this issue?
I mean, I haven't heard of any significant effort to uh, implement any reforms, but you definitely one of the big complaints that I hear, you mentioned bundlers. Bundlers are fundraiser people who raise money on behalf of a campaign, and they end up having outsized influence. They're the kind of people who might end up in a position to have influence with the mayor, maybe get some contracts. And so the rationale for requiring campaigns to say who their bundlers are is that these are people that we should know about and know that they have this influence, so we can be looking out for possibly any quid pro quo or whatever for transparency purposes. But the mayor's campaign takes a very, very narrow view. They have a very narrow interpretation of what bundlers need to be disclosed. Catherine Garcia, when she ran for mayor, disclosed dozens of bundlers, and the mayor only disclosed four, and this year he's only disclosed six so far. And that was one of the things that the auditors were pressing the campaign to produce. Give us the names of those bundlers. And in some case, again, this overlays with the federal investigation because some of the money that they're wondering about related to donations that were raised potentially by people who, they want to know, did those donors actually give the money?
So the mayor is up for re-election next year, as we stated. One of the issues is going to be his management of the influx of over 200,000 migrants to New York City. You recently brought about an audit of one of the organizations called .go that has been providing a lot of services for migrants. What did the audit uncover?
So Brad Lander, the New York City controller, has been very critical of the mayor's handling of the migrant crisis. And Exhibit A is basically the hiring of DocGo, a medical services company that didn't have any prior experience providing services, broad services to migrants. And he attempted to reject, he basically, the term of art is decline to approve in September of last year, declined to approve the .go contract. Well, he was quickly overridden by the Adams administration. They have the power to do that. And so Brad Lander turned around and said, okay, well, I'm going to audit the company, audit basically the city's handling of this contract with .go. And we recently got that audit, and what they determined, I mean, in some ways, like the Adams audit, basically that a lot of these expenditures could not be, they weren't documented. They couldn't prove that they were legitimate expenses. One of the most interesting findings is that city taxpayers have paid over $1.7 million for hotel rooms that were vacant, including a hotel in the Hudson Valley that was vacant for the 2 months that they looked at this. They really only looked at 2 months of invoices because of the auditing process where you have to give a lot of due process and give the other side a chance to respond. They only looked at May and June of last year, and there was about $13 million committed, and they said that 11 million of it couldn't be properly verified. And Lander said we should ask for the money back. And the city said, no, we're not going to do that. Sort of more or less nothing to see here. And this was an emergency, and we did the best we could in an emergency. And okay, maybe we didn't have all the paperwork right, but you're nitpicking, and this was an emergency, and we did the best we could.
And I'm wondering, the ebb and flow of migrants has continued. There's still over 60,000 people in the city's care, 60,000 migrants. I'm wondering, will this audit have an effect on the city's ability to help more migrants as they come into the city?
I think what we're seeing is a shift away from emergency contracts. That was the big rub here, is that, and that's what Brad Lander, the city comptroller, said in his criticism, was like, look, we've known about this for a long time. This has been happening. This isn't like this just started happening. And there's no reason why we have to do these emergency contracts, which suspends all kinds of oversight and accountability. And it's you can basically pick whoever you want instead of having a competitive bidding. And so now And also, he's not the only one. I mean, the city council members have also complained that there's cost overruns and that we should reach out more to the nonprofit sector. And so I think that what you're seeing is a reaction to that, and that we're moving away from these emergency contracts. So the hospital system, which handles a lot of the migrant services, the care for the migrants in New York City. They're moving toward competitive, they have moved toward competitive bidding away from these emergency contracts. And the same thing is happening in city agencies.
In our last minute or so, you've also written about Robert Kennedy Jr., who is running for president. There was a recent court ruling regarding his residency. Is that going to affect his ability to stay on the ballot in New York and other places?
Well, he's basically been knocked off the ballot in New York as of now. There's an appeal process that will be ongoing. But what happened was he says, and I mean, I think he persuasively argued that he has a deep connection to New York. His father ran for U.S. Senate here in 1964 and won, and he said that he's lived in New York ever since then. But the problem is that in 2014 he moved to California to be with his wife, and really has not physically lived. He admitted in court, and there's a trial in Albany, and he said, that he lives in New York, but he always has intended to move back to New York. That he currently lives in California, intends to move back to New York, but during the trial, evidence came out that it basically was claiming a spare bedroom. It had only stayed there one night, not too long before the trial began, and that he just had little connection. And the judge ruled that one of the most important things is there can't be an aura of sham. And she said that's exactly what this was. It was a sham address, just basically to be on the ballot.
Jay, thanks for joining us. Thanks for your reporting. We appreciate it, and I'm sure we'll be following up with you in the future on these issues.
I hope so. Thanks.
That's it for today's show. Thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Mays, filling in for Sam Roberts. Join us again next week on CUNY TV.